Welcome to today's Scrum Master training video. Today's focus is on sprint planning, practical tips for Scrum Masters. When I speak to Scrum Masters, they often ask for tips about how to make sprint planning go better, how to prepare for sprint planning, and what exactly are we supposed to be doing in sprint planning. Prior to starting sprint planning, there are some things that you can do on a practical side to prepare in the days leading up to sprint planning in order to make sure that everything goes as you desire. Work with the product owner and confirm that their priority is set for the product backlog. Make sure that the items in the top of the priority, in the top of the backlog, are all in ready state. If not, you might need to conduct some additional grooming in order to prepare for sprint planning. Remember, we want to have at least a sprint and a half's worth of work fully groomed in ready state on the product backlog at all times. Ready means that the story in the backlog is in conformance with the team's definition of ready. Definition of ready is a working agreement between the product owner and the team that talks about what condition does a story need to be in before the team can bring that into a sprint and be successful. The second thing to do, really practical, is just simply prepare the space. If the team is using a tool, then make sure that the items in the tool, the stories, the data, the sprint that you're moving things into, they're all clean, ready to go, properly set up, and clearly visible to the team so that they can see what's going on. If you're working on a physical Scrum board, make sure that you have the product backlog displayed nearby in the proper order and stories indicated with their sizes and whether they're ready so that the team can see what's happening while they're collaborating to do sprint planning. And the last very important thing that you would do prior to going into sprint planning is to determine the team's average velocity. Average velocity is usually determined one of two ways. You can take the average velocity of the last 3 sprints. So what did the team get accepted over the last 3 sprints? Average that number, and that's the team's average velocity. Or you can determine it by looking at the velocity over the last 5 sprints, dropping the highest, dropping the lowest, and then averaging the remaining 3. This average velocity is used to help the team determine how much work they can do in one sprint. Sprint planning has 2 parts. The first part of sprint planning, which is a time box of no more than half of the total allotted time for the event, is focused on the sprint goal and the sprint commitment. The product owner is required at this part of the sprint planning meeting, and the Scrum Master generally facilitates. On a practical level, a sprint planning session might look a bit like this. The product owner starts out by proposing a sprint goal candidate to the team. A sprint goal candidate is what the product owner would like to see the output of the sprint be. This is not the product owner saying, I want you to do these 5 stories. This is the product owner saying, what I would love to accomplish this sprint is to complete the feature work on feature A so that we can move it into production. It gives the team a vision to rally around so that they'll know the purpose of spending the money that we're going to spend to do the work in the next sprint. With that vision and that goal in mind, the team can know which stories are the proper stories that need to be done, which stories might be missing, and if there's conflicts in the middle of a sprint where we may need to swap work in or out, the team knows by looking at the sprint goal what stories they would be able to pull out of the sprint and replace with something else that's of a higher urgency. If the team were to take a story out that would stop the sprint goal from being accomplishable, then they would be aborting the sprint goal. Once the product owner describes to the team the goal for the sprint, the Scrum Master reviews with the team their average velocity. So then the team, after they know their average velocity, they know the sprint goal, they begin to work with the product owner and work down from the top of the product backlog, reviewing ready stories and determining which ones they are able to bring in and are likely to complete this sprint. If there are unfinished stories remaining from the last sprint, the team works with the product owner to determine if this work will carry over into the current sprint, or if the product owner wishes to put those stories back on the product backlog. The stories that the team reviews that are coming off the product backlog, they confirm that they all understand and remember the acceptance criteria, and they confirm that the story is actually in ready state. The commitment that the team makes to how many stories it can bring in is based on the average velocity. So if a team's average velocity is 25 points, they would pull stories from the top of the product backlog until they reached 25 or right around 25 points. A team might take less work into a sprint if there are reasons why it's not likely that they can complete the average amount of work they usually complete. For example, if 3 team members are out on vacation, or if there's a holiday or some other reason why they won't have the average amount of time and effort to work. The team might pull in more than their average velocity. They might have a really high level of confidence that the work that is their average is not quite enough and they feel like they can take more work on, so they might pull in another story or two. Once the team determines how many stories they can bring into a sprint, and they feel confident that this is the body of work they can complete this sprint, they review that work against the sprint goal and determine if they can actually meet the sprint goal with this work. If not, they may shuffle some things around, or they may actually modify the sprint goal. By the end of the first half of sprint planning, it should be clear with the team and the product owner what the goal of the sprint is and what stories are being committed to. Once we have a sprint commitment in place and we have a sprint goal in place, the team should order the work in the sprint in the proper order that they should work during the sprint. That might be the product owner's priority on the product backlog, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's more feasible for a team to juggle higher risk stories to the top, or maybe they need to move bigger stories at the top so they'd be more successful, or make some space in between certain types of stories because of dependencies or because of experiences in the past where they've learned the right order to work stories. Remember, the team owns the sprint backlog, therefore the team owns the priority order which they work on the sprint backlog. The agreement with the product owner is what they commit to they will deliver by the end of the sprint. Part 2 of sprint planning is different. The goal of part 2 is to design the solutions, to task the work, and to make sure that they are ready to fulfill the definition of done. This is the planning of how we're going to accomplish turning the user stories into working software. And by the end of sprint planning, the development team should be able to articulate that plan to the Scrum Master and to the product owner. So what are some practical things that happen during a sprint planning part 2? The development team talks about each individual user story as a group. Remember, the development team includes developers, it includes testers, it includes all the members of the team that are going to be working on the user stories. So they design those solutions, they figure out what they're going to do, what's the architecture going to look like, what is the actual work that needs to be done. They consider things like development. How are we going to develop it? How are we going to test it? How are we going to demo this work to the product owner and to the stakeholders? What are our dependencies? What's the definition of done? Do we need to do a code review? Do we need to do automated testing? All those things are considered at this point. The output of that conversation is that the development team creates the appropriate tasks that need to be completed based on how they're going to complete the work. They walk through every user story and do this design and this tasking. They add hours to the task as an estimate of how long they think the work will take. During this planning piece, the team considers where they might need to pair up and do some programming together or some testing together in order to exchange knowledge or in order to work quicker. They talk about what stories they should be able to swarm on. Once the team has all of the design, all of the tasking, and the estimates on the tasks, and they feel like they have a fully put together plan, they articulate that plan to the product owner and to the Scrum Master, and so that the whole team hears it and understands it, and they're all on the same page. Once that's done, sprint planning is finished. Some practical tips for Scrum Masters on post-planning activities. Make sure that all of the stories and tasks are written, they're hanging on the Scrum board or they're entered into the tool. Make sure everything has hours so that you can build your burn downs and help the team to make decisions as they go through the sprint. And then make sure that the sprint goal and the sprint commitment is written down and is visible where the team can see it, so they have a rallying point for conversations throughout the sprint. I hope that this information presented to you today on practical tips for sprint planning has been helpful. Please feel free to comment, make any additional suggestions that I may have forgotten, and let us know if there's other topics that you'd like to see taught here on Scrum Master training videos.